Hey, friend. Hey, welcome. Hey. Welcome to my new YouTube channel. This is Videogame Economics, and you may be saying to yourself, well, video games, economics, how do you mix the two? And easy answer, right? This channel, at least for the beginning of it, this season 1 that I'm doing, this kind of like pilot run, just to see how things go. This is going to be focusing mainly on microeconomics. You know, we'll get into the definitions there. We'll talk about the definition of economics and how you differentiate micro from macro. But the idea basically is that it's a study of markets. And so the way I'm going to be teaching this, it's basically going to be the same as your average AP Econ or Principles of Microecon class. Except the only difference is that I'm going to be doing it kind of all in the frame of the video game industry. And, you know, myself, when I was going through Principles of Micro, the best way for me to learn was to take the concepts and try to apply them to my life, and that usually, you know, turned out, since most things that I buy except for like gas and food are video games, and so, you know, when you're talking about producer behavior and consumer behavior, the best way for me to understand it was, oh, well, I know this game developer, I'm a video gamer, I buy their games, I don't buy their games. The reasons that I do those things, the reasons that I might buy more of one company's game and less of another's, so on, so on. These are things we'll talk about. It's not going to be strictly a study of the video game industry. This is basically a microeconomics course, just with the frame of video games, and I think that for a lot of young people it'll resonate, because, you know, every young person I know is into video games to some extent. I mean, you know, whether you're a PC gamer, you know, hardcore, you got like Titan X whatever, play consoles, you play cell phone games. I know people who just play Civ, people who don't play any games but they've played, you know, 2,000 hours of Civ. Everyone I think can identify at least somewhat with video games, and it's getting more and more, you know, common as time goes on. Everyone in some capacity is playing video games. So basically I have this whole thing scheduled out for the next 3 months, which is basically my summer break. Every Monday we're going to have a microecon lesson, and so I have 12 scheduled out. This is the first episode, which basically I'm just going to be going over the very basics of supply and demand, and it's only just an intro. The production value will get much better, I assure you, in due time. But for today, for just the basic stuff, I'm just going to be sitting here. I've got my Surface Pro 4. I'm going to be showing you some nice simple diagrams, and I'm just going to be basically explaining the very small, I'm just going to be explaining like the very bottom line basics of economics in this episode. So yeah, this is the first episode of the microecon course. That's not the only thing that's going to be on this channel. Every other week we're going to have a special video, which is going to be alternating between video game theory, stupid title, right? What? I'm not that creative. Yeah, so video game theory is basically, all it is I'm going to be explaining game theory, and it's going to be similar to the main course, the main dish, right? In that it's going to be explaining game theory with the kind of frame of video games. I'm going to be using video games as examples of these games in the more traditional sense, the things that we kind of study in game theory. Towards the end of this first season here, we're going to be kind of merging the game theory episodes with the main micro course, because we're going to be getting into oligopolies at the end, which is where we're going to be using game theory in economics. The other part of this channel is case studies, and this is going to be the part of the show that might be a little bit more macro, still mostly focused on micro stuff. So it's going to be basically, I'm going to be looking at some economic phenomena that have happened in the video game industry. For example, one of them is definitely going to be on the video game crash of '82, I believe. I hope that's right. And we're just going to be talking about that and see if we can learn anything about the game industry from that experience, and see if any of those issues still apply to this day, which in my opinion they do, but you know, we'll get into that. I just want to kind of get into it now. You know, I want to show people that maybe, just maybe, economics can be fun like video games are. I mean, they got there, you know? So let's get into it. Let's just start with the basics, right? The definition of economics. Oh, I got a computer. Economics. Definition of economics. Economics is a social science concerned chiefly with description and analysis of the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Economics focuses on behavior and interactions of economic agents and how economies work. Consistent with
this focus, exploration of microeconomics, and blah 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 blah.
And then basically the Wikipedia article goes on to explain the difference between micro and macroeconomics. And remember, what we're doing is micro. Basically what they're saying is that microeconomics is the study of behavior of producers and consumers, the specific markets that they interact in. Whereas macroeconomics is more concerned with the economy as a whole, again talking about investment, saving, government spending, government fiscal and monetary policy, all those kinds of things. So the macro stuff we're not going to be getting into too much. Micro, however, is the cool stuff, in my opinion. And maybe, after this series, it will be in your opinion too. Let's go to my OneNote here. I'm going to show you guys basically the very basics of supply and demand, and that bring in the transition music. That's good. Okay, so let's talk about supply and demand. This is going to be just kind of a basic overview of the most basic supply and demand model, but it's going to be the one model that we're going to be looking at the most. I'd say 99% of this entire thing will just be a study of how supply and demand in any given market works. So we're going to be looking at like the most common perfectly competitive market. And I'll explain later, we'll get into perfectly competitive, monopoly, oligopoly, all that stuff, but basically what perfectly competitive means is that firms, perfect competition just means that anyone can enter or exit the market without any barriers, right? But again, that's not really too important right now. What I'm saying is basically this is all theoretical. So let's just move right on to it, right? So we're gonna have a graph here, and I apologize for my shaky hands. My pictures aren't going to be exactly wonderful, but they'll get the job done, I guarantee you. So let's look at what we have here. The x-axis is going to be quantity. So in any given market, this is going to be the quantity of that kind of good or service that's being sold. And then on the y-axis, we have price. And again, same basic idea. In any given market, this is the price at which that product is being sold. We're going to look at each individual curve, the supply curve and the demand curve, and we're going to kind of work through the logic of it so that you have a good foundation. They're not just lines that don't mean anything. I'm going to do my best to explain how we derive these curves. So let's start with the supply curve. So we're looking at what's normally going to be an upward sloping supply curve. We're going to be talking a little bit about some weird situations, but not too weird. But again, for the most part, the supply curve is going to be upward sloping. So we're going to put a little S on there. And let's go ahead and just label these prices and quantities here. So quantity, let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then price 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And so let's find a point on here. It looks like 2 crosses pretty well, so we'll call this point A. And so on the supply curve here, right? So it's basically just so basically just in this market, there's going to be 2 of this item being produced at a price of $2. So let's look at another point. Let's see, we got 5, 6 here. So we'll call this B. And so, you look at it here, this is where the line intercepts. It's important, right? I didn't do that the first one, but I'll clarify this now. So you look at this, right, and we're looking at quantity of 6 and a price of 5. So, again, let me ask you, what do you think that means? It's pretty obvious, right? In this market, 6 of the item is being produced, and it's being sold at a price of $5. The logic of this, right, is that if you're a producer, you want to sell as much as possible at the highest price. If we're talking about, demand isn't a thing here. People just have infinite demands for this one good. Obviously, you're just going to sell $1 billion for $1 billion, right? But, we'll start explaining demand and why that doesn't happen, obviously. But again, that's the logic of it. That's why it's upward sloping. So it's a positive relationship. As price increases, firms want to produce more. And sell more, obviously. So that's supply. We're going to go ahead and go over here and we're going to look at demand a little bit. Ooh, that's a bad line. Let's do that, and we'll do this. Perfect. And again, so we've got price up here and quantity down here. And we've got 0, 0 here. So 0 price, 0 quantity. Obviously nothing's happening, right? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we go here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then again, this is theoretical. This is considered perfect competition, right? So in this model, we're going to be looking at a downward sloping demand curve, right? And we'll call that D. And again, let's think through the logic of this one. Now, basically, what this is exhibiting is called the law of diminishing marginal returns. We'll be getting into this more in more depth in a couple episodes, but I'll give you just a brief overview just to explain how we derive the demand curve. Say that theoretically, in the video game industry, the only two genres that are produced are shooters and RPGs. Say that you like both shooters and RPGs, but all you have are shooters, right? You've got 6 shooter games and no RPGs. When you buy one RPG, likely you're going to get more value from that than one more of a shooter, right? So, let's look at this logically. If you have one, right, one of a shooter, you might want to pay, let's say this is like $4.75, right? You might want to pay $4.75 for it. If you we're going to buy 3 shooters, obviously each one is going to have slightly less value to you. And so at 3, you're only going to want to pay $3 for it. Excuse me. And so, you continue going on this, we can look at price of 2, quantity of 4. Again, marginally, every time you buy another one, you're willing to pay less for it. And that's because you're getting less out of each one. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Yeah, that's basically how we derive the demand curve. And so now, X is going to give it to us, right? X is going to give it to you because X is going to give you equilibrium price and quantity. Did a good line. So we've got quantity on the X-axis, price on the Y-axis. We've got 0 down here. Let's put both of these into this equation, right? So we've got X. So we've got supply right here and demand right here. Now, one thing you don't want to mix up, right, is supply is upward sloping, demand is downward sloping. Supply is this guy, demand is this guy. You don't want to mix those up because that would create some real problems for the logic of how this works. Throughout this entire course, we're going to be looking at this X. So get used to looking at this X and learn to love the X. The X is fantastic. The X is going to give you everything you need. The most important thing that we derive from this X here is equilibrium. That means equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. So we can go ahead and kind of trace this over here, and basically where the X crosses that's your equilibrium price and quantity. So right here we'll call this P star, right? And right here we'll call this Q star. And so this is the point where supply and demand cross, which means that this is the price that producers are going to charge at the quantity that producers are going to charge. And at the same time, it's the price that consumers want and the quantity that consumers want. This is basically kind of an unrealistic bliss point where everyone gets exactly what they want, and we'll talk about producer and consumer surplus, but basically this means that everyone is gaining from this. I think that's where I'm going to stop this episode, but my advice to you as the viewer of this video is just take a look at these graphs and kind of try to familiarize yourself with them. It just kind of work through the logic of it, right? I don't want to get into the shifts yet because I want to make sure that you, the viewer, understand supply and demand first. Just remember that where the two lines cross, where X gives it to you, that's where you're getting the maximum benefit for both producers and consumers in this market. So that'll conclude this episode. I really hope it wasn't too confusing. I hope I did a good job of explaining everything. But without further ado, thank you for viewing this. If you got to the end here, congrats. That about does it. See you next week.